Blake, remember Blake?
Oh, yeah, I
Amazes me in some
remember.
organizations.
Well, I run into him at basketball games.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Long
okay.
story short.
All right. We will call this meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals of Thursday, April 18th, 2024 to order. Does staff have confirmation that the Kansas Open Meetings Act required notice has been properly provided?
Yes, I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice was provided.
Thank you. At this time, we'll have roll call.
I'll go ahead and proceed with calling roll. Board Member Creer.
Here.
Board Member May. Okay. Board Member May. Board Member Waters.
Here.
Board Member Owens.
Here.
Board Member Troe.
Here.
Board Member Dorsweiler.
Present.
Chair Hardy.
Here.
If Mr. May can hear us. Okay. Well, he does appear to be present via Zoom, so we'll count him as present.
Very good.
That will give us a full board and a quorum to proceed with today's business.
Thank you. At this time, we'll have approval of the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes.
And we have a motion to approve. Second.
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. Then the minutes will be filed as presented. Under new business,
Is he unmuted?
have one item, application number V24-3, filed by Mike McCall, architect, on behalf of Ryan Roofing Incorporated. At this time, we'll have a summary presentation by staff.
Thank you. We are going to have Mr. Michelson present the graphics today, and I'm going to be presenting the report. So if you could pull up the aerial photo, please, and we'll begin there. So the property that is the subject of today's variance request is part of the original town of Salina, which is platted in 1862. And in that downtown area, the properties were originally zoned F light industrial. And that F light industrial zoning classification did not require any front yard setback. So if you were to look at the aerial photo and you look, zoom out a little bit and pan up, you'll notice that all of the buildings have zero setback lines on Santa Fe, on 5th Street, and on 7th Street. And the reason for that is because the zoning district at the time, which was the F zoning district, didn't require a front yard setback. And so even though those properties were zoned industrial and not the C4 Central Business District that we have further to the south, which is a commercial district, it did allow for zero setbacks. In 1977, the city of Salina was comprehensively rezoned, and during that comprehensive rezoning effort, the F district was changed from F to I2. It was still the light industrial district, but the name changed and the bulk regulations associated with the district also changed. So now the I2 district, which is our light industrial district, requires a 25-foot front yard setback, where prior to 1977 that wasn't the case. And that's important as it leads into the nature of what is being requested by the applicant. So the applicant has a property that's zoned I2, and they're wanting to construct a 48-foot wide or deep by 240-foot wide building. So 48 by 240 feet. And that building is going to have a mixture of contractor storage for the applicant, who is Ryan's Roofing, as well as some mini storage for potential customers to rent and lease storage spaces inside that building. The applicant is wanting to have a 15-foot setback off of Pine Street. 25 feet is the requirement. Now you'll notice the building is almost as wide as the lot. The lot is 250 feet wide. The building's 240 feet wide. That's possible because there is an interpretation that because we have a prevailing setback of 0 feet on both 5th Street and on Santa Fe, that all new construction can match that prevailing setback, meaning there aren't there is not a required front yard setback on Santa Fe or on Fifth Street, but there is no prevailing setback along Pine, and therefore the 25-foot setback still applies to Pine Street, but not Santa Fe or Fifth Street. And so the applicant is requesting this variance to reduce the front yard setback on Pine from 25 feet down to 15 feet. And as justification for that requested variance, they note that their property has street frontages on all three sides, and by having a 25-foot setback on all three sides, it would decrease the usable area. They also note that by aligning the property or the south edge of the proposed building with a 15-foot setback, it would align with the property directly to the west. So in 1990, there was a variance request for a 15-foot setback for a mini storage building that was constructed directly across the street to the west. That building has a 15-foot setback, and the applicant would like to match that 15-foot setback. So when we look at the different elements that we analyze when we're reviewing a variance case, the first one is uniqueness. And the need for a variance must be caused by a condition which is unique to the property in question and not shared by other properties in the area. So the applicant has noted that they have 3 front yards, and that makes their property unique. Staff would note that just within the original town of Salina, the north edge of it, that there are at least 6 other I-2 properties that also have 3 front yards, and 1 I-3 property that has a front yard. So it's fairly common for properties in this area to have 3 front yards, which means that would not be a unique situation. The applicant also would like to note that the property, again, to the west has a 15-foot setback, and they would like to match that. So in staff's mind, the 3 front yards is not unique, and the 15-foot setback of the property to the west is not sufficient justification for matching the property. If you were to look at the adjacent property in relationship to the subject property, you'll note that the size of the subject property is about twice that of the property to the west, so they're not really comparing apples to apples. What staff has done here is we've imposed the footprint of the neighboring property to the west on the subject property, and you'll note that the footprint of the neighboring property is about the same size as the open undeveloped area that the applicant has on their property. So staff doesn't feel like the site is unique in having 3 front yards, and that there isn't good justification or reason for needing to line up with the south building to the west, because there's plenty of room to have a 25-foot setback and still construct the building that's being proposed. So staff would ask for additional information as to what is unique about this property that would warrant the variance request. And looking at the effects on the neighbors, the applicant states that granting the variance would not affect the neighboring properties because there's already a building to the west that has a 15-foot setback, and that their building would be aligned with theirs. And they also note that Pine Street is a lightly traveled road, which is true, and only has about 700 vehicles a day, but that's still 700 vehicles a day. And there's also OCCK directly to the south, which has and operates the local busing system. So there are special kinds of traffic that are taking place that may not show up in the numbers, but there are buses and other things that travel and use Pine Street. Staff's response, there are, if you look at the site plan, a number of overhead doors that are facing Pine Street. And so one of the questions that staff has had is how will those doors be accessed from Pine Street? Because what we don't want is we don't want vehicles just pulling in directly off of Pine Street onto the property and accessing the overhead doors. And so having a good, clear plan of how those doors would be accessed is going to be important. The applicant said that even though the plan doesn't show it, that they would be using two 30-foot wide openings onto Pine Street. Staff still has questions of how that would work. So for the last 20-some years, many storage facilities have been required to have a 25-foot driving aisle between the different units, and so that you have room for a car to park adjacent to a storage unit, and another car, if there's another vehicle coming in the other direction, to go around them, or even if they're coming in the same direction, they would have enough room to go around them and not cause any congestion issues. If you have a 15-foot setback, there's no way to achieve that 25-foot apron in front of the building unless you're encroaching into the right-of-way, which isn't allowed. So staff is still curious how traffic would circulate onto the site with just a 15-foot setback area. And we're also curious, and we don't really know the answer to how much of this will be paved or not paved, or what kind of surfacing there would be in terms of an apron on the south side of the building. OCCK has contacted the City of Salina with concerns of if there are plans in which vehicles would back into Pine Street, making it an unsafe situation, that they have concerns that there may be an accident with one of their buses, or even with some of their employees and people that use their services, because their headquarters is directly south of this property on the south side of Pine. Looking at unnecessary hardship, the applicant must show that not granting the variance will cause an unnecessary hardship by denying reasonable or beneficial use of the property. This requires more than just showing personal inconvenience or increased costs. The applicant's architect in this case states that not approving the setback would create a hardship because it would reduce the usable area of the site, and would also reduce storage and the potential for future buildings. Staff understands that it would be convenient for the applicant to push their building as far south as possible to reserve or preserve more open space on the site. However, we would reiterate that there is 146 feet from the south edge of the building to the south property line, and the open space that is available is nearly the same size as the entire lot directly to the west. So staff doesn't see any reason or any hardship that would be placed upon the applicant if the building were to be moved up to have a full 25-foot setback from Pine Street. And so that would be something we would ask the applicant to reiterate or clarify, because there doesn't seem to be any unnecessary hardship by requiring a 25-foot setback, as there's available options available to the applicant. Looking at the effect of the public health, safety, and welfare, the requested variance must not adversely affect the health, safety, or welfare of the public. In the applicant's comments, they state that the requested variance will not affect the public health, safety, morals, convenience, or general welfare of the public, as moving the setback to 15 feet on 15 feet from Pine Street will still allow for access to the building and would not interrupt traffic flow on Pine Street, and will match the neighboring property to the west. Staff is concerned that granting the approval of the requested variance would adversely affect the public health and safety and general welfare, as it could potentially set a precedent for other buildings being constructed with substandard setbacks when there appear to be viable alternatives, as there does in this case. Looking at conformity with the general spirit of the ordinance, the applicant states that granting the requested setback variance would be in the general spirit of the zoning ordinance, as it would match the neighboring properties, and that both North Santa Fe and North 5th Street have a precedent of 0 setbacks, which staff would also agree with. Staff would note that by granting the variance, it would undermine, or that the variance should not undermine or defeat the purpose in which the regulation was adopted. Part of the reason we have front yard setbacks is to make sure that we have good site visibility and openness along our street frontages, so that vehicles and pedestrians don't have obstructive visibility of each other, and that there aren't accidents. There's also an aesthetic standard that is established when you have a uniform setback, and there's also a buffer area for both spacing between vehicles and the property, as well as creating green space between the street curb and the edge of the road and the property. Staff believes that granting the front yard setback variance in this case would be opposed to general spirit, because the subject property does have sufficient area for the proposed building and viable options that would meet all of the necessary building requirements. So we do have a number of alternatives that we've posted for you in your report. The first is the board could approve the front yard setback variance as requested with or without any conditions if the required findings of fact can be made. Number two, the board could approve a lesser front yard setback variance than requested with or without any conditions if the required findings of fact can be made. Number three, the board could postpone consideration of this application and direct the applicant to provide additional information. Or number four, the board could deny the applicant's request if the required findings of fact cannot be made. Staff's recommendation on this particular case is that it appears that there are viable alternatives in which the proposed storage building could be constructed while meeting all of the necessary requirements, including the front yard setback along Pine Street, and staff would recommend that the board deny the requested front yard variance based on the attached findings of fact for denial. So in your packet, you'll see two different findings of fact. One is for approval, one is for denial, and staff does not believe that granting a variance in this case would meet the criteria that is necessary, that this application does not meet the requirements that are necessary for approval, and we would recommend denial.
These comments are in the packet in their report, but it's not in what you're reading. I don't understand.
So with that, staff will have any questions. This isn't the report.
Okay. So in the end of your report, we just had some follow-up comments or bullet points that we think need clarification to act on this request. And the first is to clarify whether the proposed use of the building is a mini storage facility, just like the facility on the west side of North Santa Fe, or whether it's just a general non-climatized storage building, which we have a number of in Salina. That does make a difference in terms of the frequency and intensity of use and the number of storage spaces. We would request clarification whether the overhead doors on the building would face north towards the courtyard, as is shown on the building elevation drawings that were submitted for the building permit and are in your packet, or whether those doors would in fact face south towards Pine Street as shown on this drawing and on floor plans. And so that needs to be clarified. We would request, and we think it's been clarified, needs to be clarified whether there would be a concrete apron or driving aisle between the building and Pine Street property line, so that there is some delineation or definition of what is private circulation and what is part of Pine Street. The mini storage facility to the west has a concrete apron south of the building, and Pine Street is a asphalt millings and chip seal street at this time. We'd also request that the applicant clarify whether the property owner's motivation for reducing the setback is based on the assumption of having just a continuous open curb cut between Santa Fe and Fifth Street. And if that is the case, that is not going to be allowed, and you cannot use Pine Street as part of the circulation for the mini storage facility. And so to follow up on Mr. Herr's comments, in reviewing this, staff couldn't find any physical barrier on the Santa Fe property that would prevent the building from being shifted 10 feet to the north to comply with the 25-foot setback. We also couldn't find any conditions on the site that would prevent the individual units from being accessed internally from the north. And since Pine Street can't be used as an access aisle for the mini storage, if that's what the intended use is, then we need clarification for both. What is the justification and need for reducing the setback? And is there a need for having the doors face south instead of to the north? And so we have looked at original plans. We've also looked at historical aerial photos, and there was always a separation between Pine Street and the mini storage facility west of Santa Fe, and it was the city's doing when we went in and chip sealed the road surface on Pine Street. We essentially chip sealed almost the entire right of way, and we didn't really define the street. And it was only when the city came in and did that in 2017 that the physical separation between Pine Street and the concrete aisle on the west mini storage disappeared. So there appears to be viable alternatives in which the proposed storage building could be constructed and meet all setback requirements. And so that is the things that we think need to be clarified for the board.
Hey, thank you, staff. Are there any questions for staff at this time?
I have a question.
Okay.
Looking at the aerial photos, it appears that there's power lines that run along Pine Street. Are there any utility easements that need to be taken into consideration?
Well, there is a utility easement that runs north-south on the property that would go underneath the building, and staff has been working with the applicant's architect to contact the utility companies and have that easement vacated. The feedback that we have is there aren't any utilities in that easement currently, so vacating it shouldn't be an issue. And I believe it's going before the City Commission on Monday. Is that what?
Yeah, but the power poles that you referred to are in the right-of-way for Pine Street. They're not on the property, so they're within the right-of-way. Another thing that we probably didn't touch on enough is if you look at the property to the south, Pine Street used to have 80 feet of right-of-way. In 2021, the City Commission gave final approval to vacating the south 20 feet of that right-of-way. And part of the reason for doing that is usually in the city of Salina, the street pavement is centered in the middle of the right-of-way, but in this particular case, the street surface and driving surface for Pine Street is in the north portion of the right-of-way. It's not centered, and so all the buried utilities, all the overhead utilities, the driving surface was all in the northern portion of the right-of-way. So the south 20 feet of Pine Street was vacated, and that property went to OCCK and to the Depot Architect Studio there in the former Missouri Pacific Depot. And so that essentially pushed or took the south 20 feet of that right-of-way out of public use.
In the original architectural drawings, the bays of the storage unit are facing the south. What is the actual size of the proposed bays or units, individual units?
We might ask the applicant that.
Okay, I can defer to the applicant on that. Then my follow-up question with that is, what are the, on Pine Street, where those bays are originally proposed to face, what type of parking restrictions are on that street?
On Pine Street, we don't have any parking restrictions along the street per se. One of the challenging pieces to this is that there is curb and gutter now on the south side. There is not curb and gutter on the north. Historically, it's been a gravel road, and it was just chip sealed in 2017 for the first time, as Mr. Andrews said. So it's fairly new in terms of street terms of having a solid surface. And so there is a solid surface, but we don't have an urban standard of curb and gutter on the north side. And so where I don't know that people, I'm not saying you couldn't park along the street, but it's always kind of tricky of when are you actually to the edge and when are you not. And so I don't know that I've really seen anybody parking up there. One thing that could be done is actually improving the street to curb and gutter with a curb and gutter, and that would make the edge more delineated. But I don't think there's any limitations in terms of whether or not you could or couldn't park along the street there.
And the reason why I was asking that series of questions is when I think of storage units, I think of vehicles with trailers. And I know I have a 22-foot trailer, and there's no way in 25 feet that I couldn't be extended out and impeding traffic if I was to egress to the south. So that's why I was asking that question. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's staff's concern is how this building will be accessed. That was OCK's concern when they contacted us, and it's just not really clear of how the applicant is proposing to do that and how it would work. One of the things that we suggested is just turning the building 180 degrees so that all the doors face north, where you have a lot of open space, where you could have maneuverability and better access that wouldn't impact Pine Street. And that was a suggestion that staff had for those very reasons.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, it's the applicant present. Would you please step to the podium and give us your name and address for the record, please?
Mike McCall with Emsgard Architects, 922 South Marymount.
Dan Keyboards, Ryan Roofing, 430 North Santa Fe.
Very good, thank you. Would you go ahead and make your presentation at this time?
Currently we've been back and forth on which direction to do the doors. We did end up with this plan that we have now facing south onto Pine Street with the doors. Beans is an I-2, it's not required to have any hard surfaces. So that's part of the reason we're doing this, and we're really looking at paving anything on the site. Because it's an I-2, it's not required. We're looking at future down the road with additional buildings, kind of like the neighbors. They moved the thing over to pick the 10 feet up so they could put their 3 buildings on it. That's kind of the same way down the future is what we're looking at doing here, is additional buildings onto this site for storage for Ryan Roofing themselves, and for, I guess you could say, mini storage, but I don't know if it's really, I don't know, you can
Be more, yeah. I mean, basically, our product, we have a lot of product at different times of the year, so basically for insulation and roofing material and equipment, and also, that was our main concern with the building, but there's that size of a building, we wouldn't, at all times, would need that much space. So basically, it'd be renting out those bays that are roughly 48 by 20
They're
foot.
20-foot bays. I know there was a question asked about that. So they're all 20-foot bays. Basically, we've kind of divided it right now is we've got a larger 3-bay on the end, another 3-bay. Those could be divided down into single 20-foot bays, but right now for Ryan Roofing, for what they need for storage areas, we've left a couple at an access off the yard, so they wouldn't be coming off of Pine Street to access that piece.
The other thing was part of it's security for Ryan Roofing themselves. If we had it face the other direction, now we're going to have to, we'll end up putting more fences up because now we've got people coming in and out of the yard at all times. So that was one of the things we wanted to have it to the south so they had access like the neighbors. They've understand that they repaved that and moved everything over so it looks not like it should be, but obviously people are driving right off of Pine into that facility to access all those doors. So that's kind of where our thoughts were. It's like, if we're doing it across the street, why can't we do it on this side of the street? We looked, like I said, we looked at flipping the building, but we've got other buildings planned, so turning races and stuff, so if we do come back and say we want to put another half of this building on behind it, if we've got all the doors coming together, then we're going to be really start getting tight for turning races for backing trailers in and that kind of stuff. Also taking up additional just outdoor space for Ryan Roofing and their insulation and roofing products that come in, because they come in 2, 3, 4 semi-loads at a time, so it's a lot of product.
So if you had two 30-foot wide curb cuts, how would a vehicle enter one of those curb cuts and be able to make a turn so that it could actually access one of those storage units to even get lined up with it?
I mean, yeah, that is a good question. I guess our initial is we weren't going to do any curb cuts there because it's not there unless the city's going to come back and pay to put a street in there and curb cut that. Right now, it's open. Who's going to say, if I say this is where your 30-foot is, person coming in, they're just going to back into where they want to, just like across the street. So, and unless we're going to do something to upgrade this Pine, I don't see what the issue is of backing into this building. I mean,
well, the city's position is if that's what we have to do to prevent that from happening, we will put a curb in on Pine Street.
Okay. But that's kind of our thoughts, and just from, like I said, security purposes and easy access to have not everybody, if he's renting out the last 5 spots, that those people aren't accessing his yard 24/7, because that's just a liability on his part. More security cameras, more access control, everything. So it's just increases the cost of the project, which then makes it kind of unfeasible to do. So
I think the other point that we were trying to make is that if this was a residential setting, we would also recommend denial, because the minimum setback for a garage in a residential setting is 20 feet, because that's how much space you need to legally park a vehicle between an overhead door and the street. And in this case, if you had vehicles driving in or backing in from the street, they're all going to overhang out into the street, because the vehicle or the vehicle plus the trailer is going to be longer than 15 feet. And so they're not doing their parking or maneuvering on private property, which is what is required. Because if we ever put a sidewalk or anything in there, then every vehicle would overhang and block that sidewalk, which is why we have a 20-foot minimum even for residential garages, because that's the minimum length you need to legally park a vehicle in front of an overhead garage door. So what would prevent vehicles from overhanging out into Pine Street if they were accessing these doors?
Well, they wouldn't be. I mean, if it was a single vehicle, they're not going to be into the street because they're still on the right-of-way, between the right-of-way, because you've got more than 20 feet from the door to the technical road.
Right, but But what Mr. Andrews is saying is, even if you're not in the road, you're in the right of way. And if there's a sidewalk there, you would literally be overhanging the
Right,
sidewalk.
if there was a sidewalk there, yeah.
And if you had a truck or more than one truck that's there at the same time, say you have a truck here and another truck pulls in beside them, like how are they back into Pine Street without just backing out blindly? Because they got a truck right next to them. They won't be able to see until they're already in Pine Street.
Yeah, I mean, even with another, if we did go with the 25 foot, you're still the same situation. You're backing out. You still can't.
I'm not going to disagree with you.
You still can't see, but so yeah. I mean, the only other thing that we might be consider is flipping. I know there was a talking about flipping the doors to the yard side. If we could get the 15-foot setback, put the doors to the north side, we would access from 5th Street into the property. We'd have to look at getting another easement or a approach for 5th Street on that half of the yard. We do have one on the north side there that comes through the yard. But that would allow us still to possibly do our additional buildings in the site, and then we'd be matching the property across the road, but we wouldn't have access. So it would be a buffer between the road and the public right-of-way and the building. But then it would allow us to have a little extra feet in the yard to get in and turned around, or possible with the additional buildings that we are kind of in the future planning for this site to happen, and still have room to get trucks turned in and backed in and everything. So that would be something we would be willing to look at.
All right, are there questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I got one.
Okay, speak into the microphone, please.
Let me think of it before, because I can't think of it right now.
You're talking about future buildings, then if you had another building then north of this one, what kind of spacing would you have between the two buildings?
You would, depending on really depend on what size of building we ended up with. I mean, we'd probably want at least 24 feet between the buildings. We've got to have at least 20 because of fire conditions and stuff. So that I'd have at least a minimum of 10-foot separation between buildings. So we'd want at least a 24-foot for an access drive between the buildings.
Our minimum is 25, 24.
We haven't really we've just kind of started playing with that a little bit, but we haven't really put anything too hard on paper as far as what that's going to be.
So you would have doors
Doors would both face into. So the idea would be this south half of the property would be more storage than his north half.
So then if you had a north building, would the doors open to the south?
Yes. They'd all
open together?
Together, yes. That way from a security standpoint, it'd be, if we had another building in there that basically came off of the existing building that's there to the left and across, then that kind of isolates that side into storage area. We've got an access. We know we're going to have people coming in, could be 24/7, and then they're not really coming into Ryan's lot for security purposes, for his materials and equipment and everything. So
if you had a building on the north side, it would make more sense to flip it around then, to keep all of the access
right, yeah, all the access
together.
Going together, yeah.
And you would have, but you said there's no existing curb cut to accommodate that, is that correct?
Not on 5th Street currently, no. I mean, there's an entrance there to the north. Yeah, right there. We got entrance off of Santa Fe that comes straight through and then onto 5th Street. You see the curb cut right there. But we would be looking for another curb cut down, probably in the center of that space, yeah, right in there.
Mm-hmm.
Because with this building, if we did that, then we would have to come in and we'd do some fencing from the existing building across, kind of to separate that south piece, just for security purposes for Ryan Roofing, for their equipment and stuff that's.
So if you had two buildings there, there would be virtually, the southern half of the property would be taken up pretty much by storage then.
Yes.
Would it matter if, since that's, the bottom half is storage, that you could accommodate the 25-foot setback and still have the two buildings in the southern part of the lot?
You could, but with that extra 10 feet, that's really doing nothing on Pine Street. I mean, right now, it's not curb and gutter, it's just gravel from Ryan's lot right to the road. So if you really wanted to park along there, you can just kind of pull up and park in between the telephone poles, because there's nothing that says, except for the fence that's there on Ryan's lot. It's pretty open, just kind of like the storage on the west of there. Mm-hmm. There's this concrete slab, and you just kind of pull in and pull out as you please, because they never finished. Yeah. So it's like, but if we only had a 15, we'd be matching the neighbor across the street. So that kind of keeps everything aligned down Pine Street and Santa Fe and Fifth. But then that extra 10 feet for us for maneuverability in the lot is huge, especially when you're bringing in semis or trucks and trailers and large equipment, lifting equipment to move material around. So.
For the north side of the building. I mean, for the north side of the property.
Well, for the north side of the property, but we would be bringing trucks and stuff into that south part to unload into the buildings.
And the two existing buildings there at the north part of that property, they would remain?
Yes, yeah. The farthest north one, that's his office and warehouse currently. The small white one there in the center, that's is leased out to the railroad, and then the other is a smaller, I guess, storage, the gray building there, that one there. Yeah, that one's a storage building currently. So.
My only comment would be it'd make your life a lot simpler, that 10 feet. Not to worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, if it all comes down to it, I mean, yeah, if you guys don't approve the variance, then we will end up at 25 feet. Whether we have the doors to the north or south, I don't know. We'll have to discuss that, but. Okay. If you did allow us to leave it at 15, we would put the doors to the north to make it.
Other
so
questions?
The issues on Pine wouldn't kind of go away. So
right,
just a gravel lot to chip and seal road. So
correct. Right. Other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, this open area on the lot, you talk about using that for storage. How much of that would actually get covered with a product? Or did I
varies.
What
it varies from time of year to project. Dan does projects from, a few thousand square feet to 1 million square feet. So it depends on what's coming in at what time and what they have available on job sites to keep it there or in his yard. So sometimes it can be almost full and sometimes it's very empty. So.
Okay, define full, does that mean the open area in the back? what you're considering full
Oh,
for the whole lot?
right now, if you went by there, that whole upper corner, that whole thing is all full of insulation. It's stacked, I don't know, 6 foot tall. He's got machinery and other cranes and stuff. He parks down on the other side. It just, like I said, really varies.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
Oh, yeah. Their recommendations, would you have any trouble working with them to get all those taken care of?
No, I think, but I think a lot of their issues are based about a direction of which our doors are. So like I said, if we're allowed to have the 15-foot setback, we would be willing to go ahead and say, yes, we'll put the doors to the north.
Yeah.
So, that would be, and that would take care of all the Pine Street back out and all that issues would be gone. As long as we could get our access from Fifth Street into the south half of that lot, that'd be our next
Okay, thank you.
thing.
Okay, other questions at this time? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
At this time, we'll bring the variance proposal back to the board
We
for...
want to make sure to see if we have any public comment from
Right,
other than
correct.
the applicant.
Thank you
so.
for reminding me. Do we have any public comment at this time?
So if we don't have anyone in the room or online for public comment, the only comment we had would have been from OCCK leading up to this meeting with concerns about the access and how the building would be accessed from Pine.
Very good. Okay, now we'll bring the question back to the board for discussion and possible action.
I guess staff would clarify its comments if it wasn't clear from our report or other comments. More of staff's comments, including comments from Public Works and Engineering, had to do with concerns about trying to access the overhead doors directly from Pine Street or utilize Pine Street as an access aisle for the storage units. And so flipping the doors to face north would eliminate many of staff's concerns about the overhang into the right-of-way and the traffic and backing maneuvers, and then you would be left with the question of whether the precedent set by the 15-foot setback west of Santa Fe is sufficient in your minds to justify the setback variance, and the arguments about providing additional space to the north for additional storage.
Right. I was going to ask, one of the questions I was going to ask is the precedent part of it, but in relationship to the other possibility that you were talking about, and that was future construction of sidewalk or curb and gutter or whatever on the north side of Pine Street. But if we did do that, even at some point in the future, that would not be possible on that block west then, correct?
I think that if we worked on a project to install curb and gutter between 5th and Santa Fe, that we would look at doing that the next block over as well. Our improvements to Pine Street have been incremental, and they've partially been in response to improvements that abutting property owners want to make. And so both the new owners of the Missouri Pacific Depot building and OCCK both expressed a desire to make Pine Street be more like a street instead of the constant complaints we used to get about blowing dust and gravel. And so part of the chip seal project was the fact that actually for a one-block street, 700 vehicles a day is actually a fairly high traffic volume for a one-block street. And so the chip seal project was step one. We've worked with the Bieberleys who are doing the project at the depot. They've got paid parking. They've since added some additional paid parking that doesn't show up in the aerial photo. We've got curbing and sidewalk work that we did on Santa Fe. We have curbing and sidewalk work we did on 5th Street and Pine, and we will do our best to do that as private property owners invest in their property. So if we finish out curb and gutter section between 5th and Santa Fe, we're going to be looking at the section west of Santa Fe as well.
And so there would be the possibility of some ability to construct curb and gutter and sidewalk, even given the 15-foot setback.
Yes, because the 15-foot setback will not interfere with what happens in the right-of-way. As we went back and reviewed the case file and the variance that was approved in 1990 for the mini storage, it is somewhat ironic that the board did not grant a variance on Santa Fe, and that mini storage facility did not try to match other setbacks, and they conformed with the 25-foot setback from Santa Fe. Part of their justification for reducing the setback was that both 7th Street and Pine Street in that location had 80-foot wide right-of-ways, which was unusually large for a local street. And so the fact that the right-of-way was extra wide was part of the justification for the setback variance granted on 7th Street and on Pine Street. But Santa Fe has a standard right-of-way for an arterial street, so there wasn't the justification here. On the east side, Pine Street has a right-of-way of 60 feet, which is a standard right-of-way width for a local or residential street. So that doesn't apply there, but the basis for, part of the basis for the Board of Zoning Appeals approving the variance in 1990 was that Pine Street west of Santa Fe had an unusually wide right-of-way.
So I would just like to make a comment real quick. So I can certainly understand why a business owner would want to have their property conform to their business needs for their business purposes. But also, I think the board needs to take into consideration one of the reasons why we have zoning laws and the long-term effects and planning that the city has, and make those two blend together somehow.
Thank you. What do you think?
I guess just my thoughts is the variances were allowed on the west side for that mini storage, and we're already kind of seeing an issue there where on OCCK we vacated the south 20 foot. So even though we were at 80 foot, now we're down to 60, but we all pushed it to one side. And some of the justifications for those setbacks now are causing us a problem. If we do extend curb and gutter and sidewalks that way, there's really not that maneuverability that I assume they made an assumption that, you know, if it was reduced, it would be even on both sides. Well, didn't predict the future, I guess, all that well. And that's why I have a little bit of an issue with granting setbacks not knowing how things will, I mean, that's why we have setbacks for this reason, not knowing what's going to happen.
One of the things to probably note is that the original plan for the building to the west was to have an approach off of 7th Street and Santa Fe. So it was originally designed where you would come in from the west or the east and you would just drive parallel to Pine Street and you wouldn't come directly off of Pine Street. But over time, it just became more convenient to just pull off of Pine Street, and that's how it's kind of over time morphed into that. And if you were to go out there, you'll see that there's just a blend of surfacing from pine to the concrete apron. You can see it's not intentional. It hasn't like been paved or anything, but it's just gotten worn like a cattle path over time. And if you look at historical photos since it was built, that's kind of what you see, where there's a clear delineation between the paved apron and the street, and you have a green space, and the green space over time just disappeared.
So what we're trying to say is it wasn't designed and intended that people would drive directly off of Pine Street up to one of those doors, but because of the way the city went in there and did the chip seal project and how things changed over time, basically it morphed into that situation. But if you look at historical plans and photos, you can see that originally when it was built in 1990, the customers of those south units were accessing it from 7th Street and Santa Fe and driving parallel to Pine Street, and that apron and the road kind of just morphed together. So it wasn't by design. And if we were to put a curb section in there, then we probably wouldn't even have a curb cut. We would work to have the access still be from 7th Street and or Santa Fe side. So I think Mr. Hers pointed out that we've provided you with two possible sets of findings, one in support of denial. Some of those findings in support of denial deal with the traffic concerns about Pine Street, the traffic hazard, the backing maneuvers, the hanging into the right-of-way, and then the findings in support of approval tend to focus more on the matching of the neighboring properties to the west, and the fact that Pine Street is not an arterial or collector street, but it's not the visual effect, it's not that having it 15 feet from the street is going to interfere with the city's ability to put in curb and gutter or sidewalks or any of those things. It's just that having a building that close with the expectation that it's going to have direct access to Pine Street and be that close to the street is setting up future problems and interference with our use of the right-of-way. So if there's no expectation of direct access from Pine Street and those go away, then you should focus on the visual and other impacts of having a building that sits 15 feet north of the Pine Street property line. Because if you don't have doors facing Pine, then the issues that we see relating to backing and traffic hazards and conflicts with OCC and K go away, and as a board, you're just left with the question of whether there's justification for reducing the setback so the building is located 15 feet north instead of 25 feet north, and how that impacts the rest of Ryan Roofing's property.
So one finding that we could make is that we could allow for the 15-foot variance provided that the building was flipped 180 degrees and there was no direct access to Pine Street then.
Yeah, we did not, because our recommendation was not to approve this, we didn't put out any options for conditions, but it's fairly standard for this board in acting on variances in some cases to approve a variance, but subject to certain conditions or modifications. So if somebody said they thought it was justified to approve the setback reduction, they could do so subject to the condition that the access to the buildings would be from north-facing doors. And that would be done as a condition of approval. And if the applicant wasn't willing to accept that condition, then the building wouldn't be allowed to be located 15 feet from the property line.
So a question for staff would be, if we made that a condition, does that mean since the building is blocking the entire south access to the south side of that property, that they wouldn't be able to put anything on that 15 feet because they couldn't access it from Pine Street because the building's blocking it from the north?
What would you put in that 15 feet?
Insulation that's currently sitting outside?
You could conceivably store insulation between the building wall and Pine Street as long as it was a location away from the corners where it wasn't going to obstruct visibility at the intersection. But we have a vision clearance triangle at every street intersection where anything that's between 3 feet tall and 8 feet tall is not allowed to be placed in that vision triangle. So if you had storage in that area, it would have to be confined to the central portion because you wouldn't be able to stack materials near either the Santa Fe or Fifth Street intersection.
Thank you.
We have a motion.
I guess the other thing we'd point out is that you could, not with a large vehicle, but there would still be 5 feet from the west edge of the building and 5 feet on the east side where persons or small equipment could go around the side of the building to access the south side if need be, or they could put a gate in their fence to access it that way. But that would be the limits of the access from the south.
Are you ready? Mr. Chair, I move we deny application number V24-3.
All right, we have a motion to deny the application. Is there a second? Motion fails for lack of a second. Do we have another motion?
I'm sensing, given that the last motion failed, that there's some inclination from the board to try to find a way to assist the applicant with the variance request. So with the help of city staff, I would like to word my motion in that I move that we, as a board, approve the variance of 15 feet on the conditions that no doors face south, all doors face north. And is there anything else that staff would need in that motion?
Typically, another condition that we do for storage buildings, particularly if they're large, is to make sure that all stormwater runoff is guttered and directed to the street so that you're not causing any problems with the neighbors. Now, with this being surrounded by streets, it's usually not a problem, but having that as a condition is pretty standard as well.
Okay. I would add that condition, and I'll just kind of a catch-all that the building conform with all remaining city ordinances and codes.
All right, we have a motion to approve the variance with the condition that the building is flipped 180 degrees and there are no doors accessing Pine Street from the north, and that it comply with all other ordinances in city codes. Is there a second?
Just to clarify that no access from the south.
No access from the south, correct. Is there a second to that motion? That motion dies for lack of a second. Okay, we need to find a solution here, folks.
Or it dies due to lack of a motion.
Well, I guess we can, that's the same thing as denying the motion.
One of our options
Divine.
is to table this.
Could we postpone this decision and ask that the staff and applicant work together for another solution and then bring it back to the board?
I second that motion.
Is there, when you say another solution, like what is it that you're looking for so that we can help the applicant?
Gosh. I don't know right now, Dustin. That's a great question.
I think there's some discomfort with not knowing what the future holds for this property. And, because before 17, there was no paved street. And what can happen in the next 10 or 20 years that might impact that area. It might become something that morphs into something other than I-2, who knows? And the needs become different. It's sort of like our thoughts of what we're going to happen to that building to the west has changed with time. It's taken kind of a life of its own in terms of how it's used, and maybe it wasn't even intended at that point in 1990, but and the same thing could happen perhaps.
Would it be helpful to the board to have the applicant's architect do a concept plan or concept drawing that showed the possible location or configuration of a second building to the north? Would that help in evaluating the use of the property, or is that beneficial at all?
I think that was part of my concern with it as well, because he mentioned that, well, every 10 feet is precious. Well, it's a good sized property too, though. And maybe with the second building, there's still room to maneuver between the two buildings, and maybe provide access in some part of the property for semis to move around. I don't know.
I think that would be helpful it'd help prove why the setback is necessary if you could show how it would restrict what you would want to do potentially in the future.
Yeah, and what we would do in something like that is, it's not unusual where under construction now is a mini storage facility at the southwest corner of South 9th and Waterwell Road, and that has multiple buildings in it, but it's being built in phases. So there's a phase one that's closer to 9th Street, and then as things develop or fill, then the developer would move forward to construct additional buildings. But we could work with the applicant to show a phasing plan for how this might fill in over time, and maybe that would give a better perspective and justification for what happens to the north of this is impacted by the setback of the first building to the south.
Does that sound reasonable to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. That being the case, then I think we should put this question on the possibly on our next scheduled meeting, if it works out, and with that additional information, we could perhaps be in better situation to make a decision that makes sense for everybody.
So I think that would be best to be, it was kind of formed into a motion or suggestion by Board Member Waters, but a motion to postpone to the May meeting to allow additional information to be provided by the applicant and staff might be the appropriate motion, and to get a second to that and have it voted on would be the best course of action.
Very good. We're going to get there.
That date is May 16th for the motion.
I move we postpone this application until May 16th meeting, and to have the applicant provide more information to staff, specifically where the next building would go.
I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion and second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, we'll complete the work on this one next month. Is there any unfinished or other business that we need to attend to?
Not that I'm aware of. We were going to report to the board that Mr. Aiken, our planner who did a lot of our residential reviews and some reports to this board on residential variances, has taken a position in St. Clair County, Michigan, and isn't with our department. And so we'll be filling in for him between the three of us who are still here. So.
All right, very good. And I'm assuming we have no public forum items at this time.
Don't see anyone who wishes to speak.
All right, very good. And with that, then we are adjourned.